thank you for, again, coming to Future of Food at South by Southwest. We're so happy you're here, and I'm so delighted to be able to moderate this panel. It's about the rise in women in food. And trust me, each one of these panelists are people that will inspire you and tell you about what their experience has been like building, tinkering, pioneering, and being passionate about. So just to let them introduce themselves, just name and who you're with. I'll start with you.
Riana Lynn, founder of Journey Foods, also sort of supporter and an angel investor here in the space. I am actually, and we are based in Austin, Texas. I just came off of moderating a panel, so I'm going to keep it low on the remarks here. But I do want to say that I'm thrilled to be in another all-woman panel, as I absolutely would not be here today without the support of women in my circle. So thank you for the opportunity.
I'm Kylan Akinzerbi. I'm the head of growth at Planet Forward, and we're tackling climate change by helping companies with global supply chains to decarbonize their products and businesses. And I'm also ecstatic to be amongst women. Every single day is International Women's Day, but being on a panel amongst just true friends and collaborators is incredible.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm Jenny Stojkovic. I am the founder of a media platform called Vegan Women's Summit. We're 60,000 women in the future of food all around the world. I'm also the author of The Future of Food is Female, the first book about women reinventing the food system. And I will be announcing my VC fund debuting in a couple months. We've raised $23 million for the future of food, focused on women.
That's just incredible. Hi, guys. I'm Les. I am one of the co-founders, co-CEO of Midday Squares. We make functional chocolate bars. I'm actually coming all the way down to Austin from Montreal, Quebec, Canada, and I'm really fired up to be here today. So thank you for having me. What? That's your favorite
They
city?
were excited.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they're like,
yeah.
Canada!
Anybody
Team
been to
Canada!
Montreal here? Yes,
on.
yes. I love it. I love it. So thank you for having me, Q. Thank you for having me. I'm fired up to be here.
Absolutely. So yeah, we wanted to start this panel by just informing and educating. So if you didn't know, women make up 42% of all small businesses in the US, but only 3% of them get that support that they need when it comes to capitalization. So my first question to the panel is that what do you think this shift in women really wanting to start businesses, but how that impacts scaling? Like what is that meant to you in your world?
I mean, I think that what I've seen in terms of growth, even though it hasn't really been that much, is that we need more LPs, more women running funds, as they look and see themselves in operators. And I'm really excited to see some investors here in the crowd. But I think that we need to trust in women to make those investment decisions. And I'm sure you all have found women investors in your two companies, and Jenny, as you sort of bridge out and build a venture fund now. But I think we need to talk about the opportunities as women that are investing and not just the ones that are seeking investment.
Yeah, I mean, I think as it relates to like why are we seeing more women getting into business, starting businesses, starting scalable businesses, starting venture backable businesses, I think that it comes down to the fact that we're seeing more representation. I remember when I was in college, I was like one of the only black women in a predominantly white institution, and they brought in, we had these things called World Changer Talks, which were every single Monday they would bring in a different entrepreneur. There was only one woman of color that came in. It was Atasha Cave of 12, and I remember just being mind blown. I was like, oh my God, this is doable. She looks like me, she feels like me, and that's been like my journey, is following other women who look like me and feel like me, doing the things that I want to do. That's how I ended up with Planet Forward, building alongside Julia Collins, who's the first black woman to ever found a unicorn. And that matters, like that representation matters. And then as Riana said, like as you start to enter into investor rooms and also see women that look like you, and enter into boardrooms and also see women that look like you, like that confidence builds, and then we take each other with us every single time. And so I think that's only gonna continue to snowball, and we'll talk about all the things that we need to do to make that happen, but I think the first thing starts with like getting us in the room.
Yeah. And you're actively building a fund, Jenny, so what has that been like for you?
I hang out with a lot of dudes. Like, that's the reality, you know. So prior to starting Raising Joyful, I actually created a pitch competition for women in the food space, which, you know, Riana has been one of our founders that spoke at that. And we've had over 1,300 women apply from 31 countries.
Wow.
So when they say there's no women founders, that's bullshit. There's women founders. There's tons and tons of women founders, but they're not getting the networking and the access to that capital, right? And so that's what I've really focused on, is what does it take to build that pipeline? And I can tell you, it's a long way to go. 5% of VCs, fund managers in the country are women currently. And then when you get down to women of color fund managers, it's like, I don't even think a full percentage right now. So we really have to put concerted efforts into bridging the gap to these communities of founders. It's not enough to just say, we want to fund women. You actually have to go find these women founders and be in places like this.
Correct. Yes, you need to be in places like this. Plug. Lezlie, so you have Midday Squares. What has that been like for you, being one of the co-founders of such an illustrious brand that's really, you know, y'all, there's samples, by the way. She brought samples, but what has that been like for you?
So I actually have two co-founders. Well, we're three of us, so we're three co-founders at Midday Squares. Which my first partner is my husband, Nick, and my second partner is my brother, Jake. So I am a woman in between two men, and it's been a really interesting journey. I think, you know, as we start at Midday Squares, I have two partners that are very supportive and they don't reference my gender when we're working. We work together, we use each other's strengths. We each own different components of the business, and that's been really successful for us. But when it comes to raising money and building this company, there has been instances where it has been challenging. You know, I've been in a room with investors where they'll speak directly to Jake and Nick, and then they'll make comments, right, to make me feel like I'm in the room, and I think it's really about educating. That's been my experience. Instead of getting offended by it, is more of how do we educate, how do we change? And, once they're in the room with me long enough, they realize very quickly the value that I bring, the importance that I am in the business, and gender quickly disappears. But we have experienced a lot of instances, at Midday Squares, so I'm the co-CEO, but I lead manufacturing. So we built out a manufacturing plant in Montreal, where we make right now 45,000 squares a day. And as I was building that plant, the investors would call up my husband Nick and say, "What's going on with the manufacturing plant?" And he'd be like, "Why are you calling me? Like, I don't operate the manufacturing plant. That's Lezlie, right?" So it took some time, it took some education, it took a switch in mindset for sure. And you see it and you feel it. But I think, for me, my perspective on the whole thing is we need to support each other as humans, right? And I think we as humans, I mean, it's a bit of a controversial perspective. We put the tag of male, female, right? And I've been in a lot of instances where it's like, "Oh, I'll call you up. I'm having a women's conference. I want you to speak." But they don't call Nick up and say, "We're having a man's conference. I want you to speak." They just have him speak, right? Because he adds value.
Yeah.
And I add value. And that's where I feel we need to go is finding people for the value that they bring, and giving them that platform to.
If you can't tell, these women are very passionate because they're bringing something to the table. And what I love that each of you said that's a connector is, I was picking up on access, right? So I would love for any one of you to give like an example of what it's been like being in the room and knowing that you need to bring someone else with you to give them access. And I know each of you can speak of this, but I would love for one or two of you to take that question up.
I mean, I think that's interesting for me. We're all in food. A lot of us are in sort of VC-backed food. And, food, tech, energy, climate now, like these are the biggest industries in the world. And oftentimes, especially me being someone that started as an entrepreneur when I was 24 and sort of a serial entrepreneur, as you could say it, in my career, I was always the only sort of young Black woman in these rooms, and even more so being in supply chain and manufacturing. I mean, that's the ugly, unsexy part of food. And so it's crazy to me to still be the only person mentioned in supply chain lists and in other areas of an industry that really relies on women to make decisions every single day, you know, when it comes to consumer decisions. And so I think earlier in my career, I oftentimes, and it wasn't the best decision, would find like a really close friend that knew a little bit about tech to be like my co-founder and come in, or name them the co-founder, and they would come in like a year after I had already like started scaling the business and creating the product. And I've sort of let go of holding on to the need to like bring that person in, especially as I've gotten older and just more people know me in the industry. But I was really tied to the need to bring in a white male or a white male coder or a white partner into the room so that the manufacturers and the supply chain logistics folks or the VCs would feel more comfortable.
What about you, Jenny? Or go ahead. What about you? Like, I'd love to hear any anecdotes y'all have of bringing someone else in with you.
So my entry into the food space, so my background is in Silicon Valley. I worked for a man called Ron Conway. If anyone's familiar with SV Angel, he's considered the godfather of Silicon Valley. So I worked for him for 6 years and cut my teeth in tech. And so when I came into the food space, I really came to it from how can we take what I believe is the next big transformative industry, certainly from a climate perspective, it's the one that we do need to transform, and make it cool and sexy and accessible. And my entire career in tech, I was like pretty much the only woman at the table most of the time, because I not only was, in VC post-2008 tech, but also was in political aspect of it. So it was like male on male on male. So that's actually where the idea of Vegan Women's Summit came from. And it's funny, your point about a women's conference, because we do a conference of about 1,000 future of food leaders each year and has the word women in it, but about 25% of our attendees are men.
I love that. I love to hear that.
And 50% of our attendees aren't vegan.
Yep.
A lot of people are just coming to get a 360-degree experience around like what are vegan products, like vegan boots, vegan food, Midday Squares, vegan company, right? Like that is how we're bringing people into the room, because we are quite literally creating the room. 3 years ago, it was 250 women in San Francisco. This year in New York City, we're about to sell out. We're partnered with Mayor Eric Adams, the second most powerful politician in the United States of America. We're gonna have 1,000 people in New York. So the room's getting friggin' big.
Yeah.
Jenny, I want to add to that just real quick I think that's the thing is today, I hate public speaking. I don't like putting myself out there like this. And I think that's showing up, right? Even if you're uncomfortable, get comfortable with being uncomfortable, and sharing your story with different people, different areas in the world is important, right? We need to share our stories. We need to get out there more, even if it's uncomfortable. That's how we're also going to create awareness, right?
Right, and give access, right?
Totally.
So one of the things that I love is that I believe in the whole term of own it, right? Like own your space, own your thing. And so when I think of that, I think that there is a lot of areas in the food ecosystem that I really believe women are positioned to be the best solvers of, if you will. So how do you think, being a woman and owning it, how you're seeing women make an impact in the food ecosystem?
I'll start 100%. So I think one of the things that's just important and unique about women is we understand intersectionality. Like we understand that issues are extremely complex, and we also understand the importance of solving like things from the root, like systemic solving. So in the climate space, for example, startups have exploded. It's a super saturated space now. Whenever you think carbon accounting software, there's tons of them out there. But so many of them have solved for like a reporting use case or a compliance use case. It's like, that's not why we started climate tech. Like the purpose of climate tech is supposed to be to solve for climate action, like changing climate change.
Actually do it.
Yeah, like can we actually fix the problem, right? And so that's one of the places that we, for example, have innovated in a unique way and kind of ahead of the curve. And I think that's because we're women who saw the actual need. Like we started our company to save the next generation. Like that's always been the core. Our mission statement is to create a regenerative future for the future of all beings, and we like hold ourselves accountable to that. And how that's played out in terms of creating an actual scalable, venture-backable, successful business that's, you know, surviving in the market downturn and all of these things is that the market has evolved. We've gotten to a place where we need companies to actually reduce emissions and think critically about their supply chains. Like, we will not have a food system if we don't solve for climate change. And so we've now started to, you know, get the customers and get the investors from companies that had originally started just solving the downstream issues. But we saw ahead of that, and I think that that's something that's unique to women because we have to.
Yeah, I love that intersectionality. Go ahead, Jenny.
So I wrote a book on this, The Future of Food is Female, available on Amazon, worldwide. But, you know, to the point of why women in particular, 93% of consumer food purchases are made by women. We control the grocery carts of the world, right? And so all of the conversations you're hearing today, you know, there's folks that are talking about kelp, there's folks that are talking about crickets, there's folks that are going to be talking about alternative proteins, which is, you know, my specialty, plant-based, lab-grown meats, things like that. These are all very new foods for a lot of people. And if we know for a fact that the main consumer that is going to be making these household purchase decisions is a woman, they're the people we need to be talking to and working with to create these products that will resonate with the consumer. I think that's one of the biggest challenges we have in alternative protein is that we have led with a very masculine, very tech-focused approach to food. And that doesn't necessarily work for a mom that is picking up, you know, some food on her way home for her 3 kids. Like, that is why we must lead with women in mind when it comes to that transformational moment with the consumer.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It's a very interesting way to look at things because we are the decision makers. I mean, the stats say so. But I would say, from my perspective, right, being in a partnership with 2 men, I deal with 98% of the human resource problems at Midday Squares.
Lovely.
So I am, you know, when it comes to emotional, you know, intelligence and being able to understand people and being able to sit back and listen, Jake and Nick have 0 capacity. It's this small. The minute it gets out of this, I have to go home for a nap. And it's okay, right? Because that's where we have different superpowers, and that's okay. And my superpower is to be able to sit back and to, you know, not react from ego, or it's really listening, understanding the situation, and being able to come at it from a very different perspective. And I think that's really powerful. And a superpower that we do have, right, is the emotional intelligence. It's been very important to the infrastructure at Midday Squares. And so I had a therapy session before I came here. I have a business coach that I meet with twice a week. The first session is with Jake, Nick, and I. And the second session is me alone. And that was the session this morning. Oh, yeah. And we've been doing that for 4.5 years. That's the one thing that's kept our relationship strong, is being able to learn how to have really hard, open conversations. But in this morning, you know, our HR director actually left Midday Squares 2 weeks ago. And so I've been putting on my HR hat, and we were just talking about that this morning, and I was talking about this panel, and my therapist was saying, that is the difference between fundamentally men and women, and why we need more women in the workforce, you know, and these specific roles. And at Midday Squares, I don't know, we're like 75% women in our team. So yeah, the emotional intelligence is key.
That's awesome. So we've heard a little bit about your stories and your passion, and one of the key words of this panel to me is the rise of women in food. So let's look forward for a minute. And like, what are you seeing in the food ecosystem that is exciting you right now? Whether it's you're involved or not is irregardless, but what are you seeing that you can help inform the audience on, that's something that's developing or being crafted that is a showcase of how the rise of women in food is taking shape? I know that's a tough one a little bit. But
I'll be honest, I I am stuck in a manufacturing plant 5 days a week. Being in a startup, guys, I don't, it's 16-hour days, 6 days a week. I haven't had much time to be out there and see what's going on. So being here today and even listening to some of your stories and some of the insights, it's just incredible. So for me, I'm heads down in the weeds right now. And so I'm not aware of what per se is happening. So I'm excited to hear what you guys are thinking.
Let me speak to that before y'all answer that. So full disclosure, I like telling people the anecdotes and behind the scenes. So with Leslie's company, Midday Squares, her brother is this most dynamic personality, y'all. You see him all over social media. And we literally said to her, we want you, because we need to hear your part of the story, right? And that to me is an example of like what she said is her reality. She's stuck, like, you know, she's a builder and doing just the same. And she was shy. She was shy about it. She's like, well, you know, my brother is the one that, okay, we hear you, but we want you. And I think that's where you can make impact without it being a heavy lift or fancy or sexy. Her story is just as impactful when she says, oh, I got to wear HR hat because I have the highest emotional intelligence of all the other co-founders on my team. That's really important, like, right? So anyway, just wanted to give that anecdote. Sorry, I hope y'all remember the question. Go ahead.
No, but I think I'm glad that was highlighted, because I think the rise of the women in food also means that we're diversifying and representing different parts of the value chain, right? We need to tell more stories of women that are farmers, of women that, like for me, have an AI patent. You know, our coders and software are running manufacturing floors, are coming up with strategy for the future of supply chains, and or are also authors, and you're telling those stories, or you know, the stories of Pinky Cole that are operating, you know, chains of restaurants and becoming hospitality leaders. We definitely need to highlight women being more than just the influencer personalities or the marketers, and sort of packaging the supplier, you know, this like supplier toolkit that a lot of CPG companies have.
You know what is so wild? So I speak a lot on the future of food, alternative protein, like that's my expertise. Like, and I go all around the world. I do a lot of business conferences on this, similar, Riana, you do as well. And I cannot tell you how many times when we get to the Q&A after I've explained this like super in-depth conversation of like, here's this $1.4 trillion, blah, 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 here's what we're gonna do, market share, manufacturing capacity, blah, 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 blah. And someone puts up their hand and they're like, can you recommend a blog or cookbook? And it just like blows my mind, honestly. And I never see any of the counterparts up there get asked about some of those questions. So to your point about women being represented beyond just as the influencer, particularly in the plant-based space, like we really need to move to like women as executives, women as manufacturers, women as operators, because I experience that all the time.
And I kind of want to expand it beyond just like women in food, but also things that are potentially like more feminine characteristics of how we do business. I think what I'm super excited about is genuinely shifting business models and shifting the way that we think about capitalism. Like within the food system, the way that we've done things to date just hasn't worked well for us. And one thing that I'm extremely excited about is the fact that people are actually willing and open to collaborate these days. So I've always worked on business transformation, so to speak. I previously worked in the private equity space and led kind of the rise of ESG investing across private equity, helping companies become more profitable in a world that increasingly values sustainability and business ethics and transparency and all of these things. But profitability is like ultimately what's always been top of mind, and traditionally in capitalism, competition is what drives profitability, and in food in particular. And so one thing I've been like extremely enthusiastic about lately, like my job is to go out there and talk to the Nestles of the world and the Unilevers and the Walmarts and figure out how we're gonna tackle climate change and give them the tools to do it, do the strategy to figure it out. And I was in Davos this year, and Nestle's on stage, Unilever's on stage, and you would expect them to be, you know, competitors fiercely. And one thing they could potentially compete on is how fast are we moving on our sustainability goals. But instead, they've decided to come together and recognize together we have way more purchasing power to change the way that our supply chains are going to be operating and, you know, actually reward farmers for implementing regenerative ag practices. AB InBev started the Next 1000 accelerator to scale up climate solutions that can help all of the large food companies to achieve their goals. And so that's something I didn't expect, honestly. Like, I've walked into a lot of these conversations like, uh-oh, who are you working with? Who's your competitor? Like, let me navigate through this real smooth. And so the fact that I've realized people are actually willing to come together and are recognizing that collectively we can move way faster, and that climate change and transforming our food system is one of the places we cannot afford to compete is really, really exciting.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, Nestle's got a massive plant-based incubator now. You know, like some of these companies, I just actually found out that, you know, Upside Foods, the biggest cultivated meat company in the United States, is 7% owned by one of the biggest meat companies. It's a little known fact there. So they're invested in this, whether it's external or not.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do want to add something on that. I think the piece that we need more education about and more support is the smaller companies, right? We talk about the big companies, but, you know, when we talk about sustainability, right, my packaging right now is not recyclable. Right, and the biggest the piece, not that I don't want to make it recyclable, that is top of mind, but the problem is the consumers don't want to pay for it, and as a smaller company we can't afford to sustain, right? We're not profitable yet. I haven't made $1, and I just to tell you my team how pumped I am to make $1, but the reality is we're working towards growing our gross margins and all these things, and particularly at Midday Square. We don't put any preservatives in our product, okay? So it's a really clean, better for you chocolate bar, and the preservative is our packaging and our fridge. But the thing is with the packaging is we need a metallized layer. And to get a package that can preserve the product that's not metallized layer is very expensive. And so it's like, how do we figure out how to support the smaller companies in becoming sustainable, and how do we, you know, because the consumers at the end of the day are going to say they want one thing, but when they get to the store and they have $200 worth of products in their cart, and you're talking about supporting a family, and then you see a chocolate bar that's $2.50, or you see an X, Y, and Z big company, $1.99, what are you going to buy, right?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because when you think about the stats, like women are actually the ones that are the decision makers at the smaller companies, right? As women hold up half the sky, but we own about 10% of the land globally, and so that means that the decisions to impact a lot of this space, to compete in this space, will come down to like supporting the smaller businesses, especially as the proliferation of ownership and sort of women entrepreneurs has really taken off in the past decade, especially in the VC-backed and in the CPG space. And so I definitely agree and support in that collaboration, but definitely through every size of business. And there are a lot of large companies that feel very threatened by smaller companies right now, especially with the virality of social and the easier opportunities in DTC. And so if we can find collaboration through multiple parts of sort of business economics, I think there can be even faster growth and change in consumer opportunities and access.
I just want to quickly layer on that, because on this idea that like maybe, you know, we're moving towards different forms of value, I think we saw that play out this week for us in a really real way. Yeah. So we started Moonshot Snacks as the first ever climate-friendly snack brand. We started it to basically create a case study for our software as to what we can create for other businesses. Fully regenerative supply chains, fully recycled packaging, carbon neutral operations. Like, we really stuck to all of our principles, as I talked about earlier, back to our mission statement. And there were some trade-offs that came into that in terms of like, you know, margins and all of that. But we told our story well. And we told our story to people who wanted to hear it. We found out that 50% of our consumers learned about regenerative agriculture through interacting with our brand, which was incredible. Awesome. Learning to actually value that. We built out a proof point that consumers today are, in terms of who cares about sustainability, is not just hikers and people in the mountains. Like, it's people that look like us. And this week, Patagonia acquired Moonshot. They hadn't made an acquisition in over 20 years. That's cool. But they did that because they wanted to learn from us. They're like, we don't know how to, you know, the investments you've made in your supply chain, the investments you've made in your storytelling are valuable for us to be able to do that across the rest of the business. And so it's hard, and you're not sure that it'll play out, but I do think that we're starting to see more and more proof that it can work.
Let me speak to that real quick, because one of the things that we always try to make sure we're capturing in any audience way in what you're hearing is that when we first started Future of Food at South by Southwest, it was 2021, and a lot of people didn't understand why we had so many thought leadership coming out about climate, and it was titled food. But what we found is that you really can't talk food and any type of future of food without making that connectivity. And so there was something that was said, so through our partnership with Kroger Zero Hunger, Zero Waste, Denise, she's on the sustainability side for them. Also, Dr. Shutta, who's with We Don't Have Time, climate, organization. So I would love for y'all, not in a technical way, because I know y'all can get technical all day, but I would love to hear, just for you personally, when did you make that connection between food and climate and all the other industries that are impacted? Was it something you ate? Was it something you heard? Was it something you experienced? I would love for each one of you to speak to that.
I mean, for me, it was pretty early for me. I think when I decided to go into entrepreneurship in food, it was actually around sort of when I was in college observing the impact in access to food during Hurricane Katrina. But when I started my first food company, true food company, in grad school, I was 24, we were one of the top juice bars in the country. And we were making thousands of bottles of juice per day out of Chicago and shipping them from Puerto Rico to Vancouver. And there was no logistics chain for us to be able to recycle those bottles. I was sort of looking at it through BPAs and other endocrine disruptors and sort of the nutrient focus at first, but we were essentially pushing out 2,000 to 6,000 bottles of waste every single day as one company.
Wow.
And I think packaging was really when I think this was 2013, really when things started to shift my focus, and where climate had to be a part of the conversation.
Yeah. What about you?
So my connection was actually kind of fascinating. I grew up in a very small town of about 2,000 people in Canada. So I was born a couple hours outside of Toronto. So I grew up around farms my entire life. And I had no idea that there was any, I had no idea I was eating meat or dairy or eggs that came from anything different than what I saw growing up. And then, of course, I learned as I got older, what industrialized animal agriculture is. 99% of all animal agriculture in North America is factory farming, is what it's called, right? And so as I started to learn more and more about what factory farming is, I learned that, about 20% of all greenhouse gas emissions globally come from meat, dairy, and eggs. And 30% of all methane emissions on the planet, which is a worse greenhouse gas than carbon, it's 27 times more heat capturing, comes directly from cattle. So as I started to make those connections, I made the choice myself. I got, that was my personal side of things. But then in the last year, as I've started to build the case around this fund, I really discovered that we're not a food fund, we're actually a climate fund that's using food as its transformation. Boston Consulting Group did a report this summer that found that investing in plant-based protein is 11 times more effective for climate than electric vehicles. It's 4 times more effective than decarbonizing cement and green buildings. It is literally the most effective climate investment, and most people have absolutely no idea.
I love that.
I want to add just on the plant-based, being a plant-based product, the cost of plant proteins is just through the roof. And that's the problem. We got to work on that, right? So right now, what will happen is Canadian companies will buy pea protein from China, because in China, they will extract the protein and they will use it for other things, right? So we'll make noodles and different
Waste
things.
stream, yeah.
That's it. And it is still cheaper to it be in Canada, purchase from China, bring it all the way back to Canada, than just buying it in North America. And we need to address that. And there's a lot of great organizations that are coming together now, but the government needs to support these manufacturers, farmers, and companies to produce locally. I mean, just in Canada, faba bean and all the plant proteins we have, pea protein we have access to, but the problem is we can't manufacture it, we can't process it, and that's the biggest problem. So when you buy a protein bar and you see whey protein, you know, you're paying $5-6 a kilo. On plant protein, I'm paying $22 a kilo, right? And then again, it comes down to the consumers and the price point. And so this is where the education starts, and this is what we need to start changing. And I think ultimately, you know, the only plant protein that's really affordable is soy, and soy is not great on the stomach, right? Like, it just isn't.
Yeah.
And maybe some people like soy, but it's harder to digest. So there is still, that is, to your point, is it's a huge problem. But I think what we need to see is the cost of plant proteins come down, and how do we do that is try to produce locally.
I just noticed we have 5 minutes left. We can talk all day, so just give me a second. I don't want to leave this panel without giving you each an opportunity for our very last question, because each of you are inspiring in your space and just by your presence here, right? So what I would love for you to leave with the audience is, what's giving you hope for the future? Like, I know that's a broad stroke question, but when you're looking, whether it's directly food related, climate related, in your world of circle of inspiration, what is giving you that hope for the future?
I'll answer the last question and this one in one. But I got into food because of climate. I've always been an impact-oriented person. I've always looked to the future in terms of how can we create a better world for the environment. And when Julia came to me and said she was going to start a climate tech company focused on food, I was like, okay, well, I love you. Let me think about this a little bit. And started researching and realized that the food system is one of the only places that today is 30%, it's a 30% contributor to global warming. One of the only places that we have the opportunity to actually turn a system into something that can fight climate change. Like, that's crazy. It can actually be one of our tools to get to the future that we need to get to. And so that makes me so excited. And then when we start to marry the fact that we're seeing progress with also the consumer-facing positive outcomes that can exist for businesses like yours and everyone else's, that's when it starts to become a flywheel to me. So Nielsen came out with a study recently. Regenerative agriculture claims for brands have grown 130% over the last 5 years. Lower emissions claims for products have grown over 10% per year over the last 5 years across all categories. And so we're starting to see that consumers want this and are asking for it and are rewarding businesses that are doing it. Businesses that have sustainable or climate-related claims attached to their products are growing 10% more than conventional counterparts. And so we're getting to a place where the incentives are there for us to have a more climate-friendly future, and that just
makes you
blows
happy.
my mind.
Go ahead, Jenny.
To that point, actually, something I would caution everybody, look at where you are getting these claims from, because 3 weeks ago, JBS, which is the largest meat producer in the entire world, actually got found to be violating the Better Business Bureau's deceptive advertising clause because they were claiming to be regenerating and working towards zero emissions, which just turned out to not be true, right? So we need to make sure that when you're supporting businesses like Moonshine or like Midday Squares, you actually are looking to see that this is a genuine product that truly is building the world that you want to see.
That's a great point, yep.
Because big businesses, it's greenwashing. They know that this works. They know saying the word regenerative. I just was at Expo West, and I saw regenerative on everything. Everything on earth was regenerative. It was like regenerative juice. There's like regenerative body lotion. I'm like, how are any of these even working? So I think that it's exciting that the consumer's interested in sustainability, and I think we need to continue to educate and build that and make it normalized. And that's what I think is most energizing.
So Riana, you got 30 seconds, What's making you hopeful of the future?
For me, it's always been sort of this focus on regional manufacturing. One of my favorite books was, and it is, How Europe underdeveloped Africa, and I think you'll see in the coming years studies that show that we have underdeveloped North America, Mexico, US, and Canada in manufacturing. And so for the women in this room, for Lezlie, who you inspire me in manufacturing, and really everyone on this panel, but I want us to make manufacturing sexy so that we can continue to bring it to the US and really develop and impact the future of plant-based, of farming, and of lowering the cost and accessibility to better products.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Rihanna, you nailed it. It's how do we make manufacturing sexy again? And honestly, we need more younger people and the younger generation to get fired up about manufacturing.
Yeah.
So I wholeheartedly agree. For me, it's the innovation behind developing great products. I love food. I love snacks. I think innovation is needed. We need people to be innovating in the space and trying new things. Food science is just incredible. And I think I myself am really inspired about what I can continue to innovate and bring to the market in the functional chocolate space. What would Hershey's look like if they launched in 2023? And that's what Midday Squares is doing. So
Love that.
thank you
Love
for
that.
having us today, Q.
Yeah,
This was awesome.
so you
Thank you,
guys
everyone.
inspire us, by the way. So thank you so much. And woo, give it up, give it up.